Might cop a grizzly, pull up in your cul-de-sac and then just pop a willy. Get really, really rich and then just drop a milli. Yeah, they calling me a redneck, a hillbilly, but they still feel me.
I think we got to start out this show with a R.I.P. Regis Philbin, man. Tough week. 2020 is a tough year, but this has been a tough week. Regis Philbin, man. What a legend. Did you watch Who Wants to Be a Millionaire?
I did. Only when he was the host, though, because I kind of got out of it and switched to Jeopardy after that.
That's an interesting change up. When did you watch it? When you were a kid?
Yeah, pretty young.
So I remember watching it first season it came out, and I think this has made the rounds on the Twitterverse this week since Regis has passed, but you will recall the greatest moment probably in television history, at least in game show television history. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, I know it. It is the greatest moment in television history.
I'm gonna do a recap of it because I think it's worthy of this episode, opening it up. And for those of you who may not be familiar with Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, pretty simple concept game show. They ask you a series of questions. If you get enough of them right, you start winning increments of money. You have 3 lifelines, which are phone a friend. You can phone a friend to help you out with a question. You can poll the audience, or that's 50-50. You can get rid of 2 of the answers, multiple choice, 4 questions or 4 answers. Anyway, so it's pretty hard. The questions are fairly difficult, but this one guy, John Carpenter, this motherfucker, and I remember watching this not live, but when it first aired. He gets up there and he answers all the questions perfectly, right? Doesn't use a single fucking lifeline, which is legendary in and of itself. He gets to the $1 million question. I think it was something like, which of these presidents appeared on the show laughing? Like, who the hell would know that shit? This guy doesn't skip a beat. He's like, Regis, I'd like to use a lifeline. I'd like to call my parents, call my dad. And he's like, Regis will go, okay, well, our friends at AT&T are going to get your dad on the line. And he calls him up. He's like, oh, is this dad? And he's like, yeah. This guy, all right, this is the most gangster moment in television history, hands down. He leans back in his chair, arm cocked back. If he had a cigar, he would have popped that sucker out, started smoking. He said, hey, Dad, I don't need help on this question. I was just letting you know that I'm going to win the $1 million. Boom! What the f***?
Dude, that guy's a legend. Do you know what he's doing now?
Yeah, I do.
Me too. He's still working his fucking day job.
And ironically, he's an IRS agent.
Yeah, and he was... Even up to that point, he made sure to let people know that of the $1 million, $400,000 went to taxes.
I saw that. Of course, there's a story that they did in the local newspaper. He lived in Connecticut. It was 10 years after the show aired. So the show aired in 1999. This was in 2009. I love this article. Whoever wrote this, genius. John Carpenter, the man who people still think is a millionaire, ordered a slice of cheesecake and a decaf cup of coffee when we sat down to talk at the Hamden Townhouse a few nights ago. He said he and his wife don't go out to eat very often, maybe once a month. Quote, we go to Chili's or something like that, end quote. What a fucking riot this guy is.
Dude, all of his money, he was really smart about it. He invested it. He put it away for his kids. I mean, it's literally what you hope these people do, but half the time, well, actually more than half the time, they don't do that. But this guy, his background and just being the gangster he is, he's a smart dude.
He probably also knew that his employer was going to nickel and dime him for everything that he was worth.
Well, I think that's the shitty part too. Is like, so. You can go and like meet with an accountant and try and get as many tax cuts as you can, but like this, it's his employer. Like they've got double sets of eyes on him, so he's just gonna pay the $400 up front and be done with it. I mean,
I guess, yeah. This is also from the article. He said, so this says those who do recognize him often say, "Oh, it's the millionaire." This irritates him. Quote, I wasn't a millionaire a second after I won the money, he noted, because I had to pay taxes on it. And like he said, I paid about $400,000 in federal, state, local taxes. This is also the best part. There's another thing he doesn't like that people sometimes say. They ask him, why are you still working? He always answers, because I live in Connecticut.
Yeah, I saw that.
What a legend. I know that this is sort of like a John Carpenter section, but I mean, I know we're supposed to be eulogizing Regis Philbin here, but he's the one that led us to the legendary John Carpenter, who has a Twitter, by the way.
Yeah. Regis, getting back to him, he will, I think, go down in the same book as like Letterman and Carson. I think that he's going to be, I mean, Letterman's kind of an asshole, but Carson kind of died a TV hero. I think that Regis is going to be in that boat as well.
As long as cancel culture doesn't catch up to him like it does with everyone else.
That is honestly something that crossed my mind was, you know, he died before cancel culture could get to him.
Good for him, man. Good for him. Speaking of cancel culture, what about our Appalachian of the Week this week, Big John? Terrible transition.
Probably the least cancel culture thing that we will ever talk about. So if you follow me on Twitter, you probably saw this, or if you follow the show, you'll definitely have saw this. So in Pleasants County, West Virginia, which is not too far from me, there is a story that I think is just gold. It's somebody that you strive to be, and that just happens to be 10-year-old Elliot. For her birthday, Chuck, her birthday is August 3rd, if you're trying to celebrate. Her birthday is August 3rd. They have a food truck Friday in St. Mary's, West Virginia. They have a bunch of food trucks. A bunch of people come that have made food. Well, for Elliot's birthday, she didn't want any presents. She just wanted the ability to set up a lemonade stand and donate all the proceeds to her local humane society.
God bless her. That's awesome.
No, I mean, nothing. She didn't ask for anything else. She didn't even, shit, I'll admit it. When I was 10 years old, I'd have been like, I want to set up a lemonade stand because I'm trying to buy, X toy, whatever.
Yeah, I wasted all my money on Big Lots toys, which looking back on it were shit to begin with.
Yeah, like I would be buying like Yu-Gi-Oh cards or something. But
investment.
But yeah, I mean, Elliot didn't want that. Decided to raise the money, and I mean, bless her heart. That is something that we need more people like that. And yeah, if it takes a 10-year-old to show us what people should actually be like, I'm all for it.
Honestly, a lot of adults act like 10-year-olds in this world. So
unfortunately, they don't act like that one.
Exactly. Elliot is the prime example of what we should be striving to achieve in life, and it's sad that it takes a 10-year-old to show us that. But kudos to her.
I've got to throw in one quote from Elliot just because it is the cutest thing I've ever heard. They asked why she chose the Humane Society, and this is a quote. "I love puppies and kittens, and I know it takes a lot of money to find them a home and to help them stay alive."
Yes.
Love
this girl.
What a
She's
champ. Great. What a champ. We need more Elliots. That's what we need.
This is what Appalachian of the Week is meant to be.
I agree. That's what it should be.
Well, I think we can just end the episode.
Yeah, that's a hard
right?
follow. That should have been at the end.
No, I mean, this is it. That's the episode. Yep. We're 9 minutes in. Yep. That's it.
We've talked about Who Wants to Be a Millionaire and Elliot, and that's it.
Honestly, leave you on a good note today.
Yeah, we're not gonna drag it on.
We got other stuff to get into. I actually wanted to reintroduce a segment that we started at the beginning of this show and have seldom brought it back because it's called the Coastal Elite Corner.
Big city coastal elites.
Selling a narrative to their coastal elites.
Belief by coastal elites in dogma.
Coastal elite because I now live in the D.C. metro area. John tries to keep me honest, but I also try to keep our listeners informed on what's happening in D.C. that's relevant to Appalachia. And turns out not a lot happened that is because we're in a global pandemic and Congress doesn't do much at all except bitch. But this week, John, they did something very important. And I will premise this by saying that this bill, it passed in the Senate a couple weeks ago, but I wanted to make sure it got through the House before saying anything. This bill is really important to Appalachia. It really is. It's called the Great American Outdoors Act, and you may have heard of it. It has a lot to do with national parks funding, which is something that never happens in the United States Congress, hardly ever at all. And I wanted to talk about this, one, because there's so many national parks in Appalachia that really desperately are in need of funding, and that this will really help out, but also because I have a little bit of a personal connection to this. I did a small piece of work on this when it was the National Parks Legacy Act before it got this most recent iteration, but my former colleague, Martin Penny, worked for the better part of 4 years on this and variations of this bill to get it passed through Congress and to get Tennessee's entire congressional delegation on board with it. So this has been a long, drawn-out process by a lot of really dedicated people, dedicated organizations, including Pew Charitable Trust, which we worked with on it. And this is a really big deal. This is, the AP called it the most significant conservation legislation enacted in nearly half a century. It got bipartisan support and is sitting on the president's desk. He's expected to sign it. It provides $9.5 billion with a B and funding to address a deferred maintenance backlog in America's national parks. So every time the government shuts down those non-essential services, which unfortunately include the national parks, they just start racking up these maintenance fees on all the things that need fixed in the park, and it never gets that back funding that it's needed, and it's finally going to get that. Really, really big deal. Kind of flew under the radar last week, but when the president signs it, that's a big deal. It's a big win for Appalachia and the rest of the country.
Looking at Appalachia, one thing that we do tend to have is our national parks and parks in general. We have the people want to come in, they want to have this tourism in Appalachia, but we need the funds to be able to maintain all the things that need to be maintained. I think that this, Chuck, I think you've explained it pretty well. This will help Appalachia in general. It's going to make sure that people still want to come to the region for the national parks and for all of the things that we tend to offer.
2 seconds on it. So, and I want to just add to this, it's important to note, and I actually didn't realize this until I started working on this several years ago, is that this isn't just like for your big national parks like the Great Smoky Mountains, Rocky Mountain National Park, Yellowstone, all those, which obviously this is a part of that, but the National Parks Service and the parks themselves are made up of more than just those big parks. You have scenic rivers, you have scenic trails, like even the Harper's Ferry as a National Historic Park is technically a national park. The Gauley River in West Virginia, New River Gorge is a national scenic river, and so the facilities that are associated with those places are also going to be helped by this. So it's not just those big, huge parks. It's a lot of different places, especially those smaller ones where they don't get as much funding as some other places. They're going to be really helped out by this. So that is, look, I can't always say this a lot, but Congress actually did something really important last week, and it should be acknowledged. But anyway, so that's our Coastal Elite Corner. Maybe, hopefully, one of these days I'll be able to do it again when there's more important things happening in Congress. Fingers crossed, John. But on to our main topic, and this one is one that you and I have sort of tossed around the idea, the concept of for a long time, and I think it's finally, I would say, an appropriate time to talk about it and to introduce the subject. We're talking today about Appalachian heritage and more specifically the term redneck. And I guarantee you everybody listening to this show has heard the term redneck before. Maybe they view it as derogatory. Maybe they view it as a term of endearment. We're going to talk about it, and we're going to talk about why you should view it as a term of endearment and the history behind it and why it's more relevant today than it has been in a really, really long time. And I want to start out, though, John, and really I think the goal here is that we are advocating for taking back that term. A lot of dictionaries and stuff define redneck as a disparaging term or a person whose behavior and opinions are less desirable in society. And John, when you were growing up, because I'll tell you mine, I think it's probably pretty similar, but when you were growing up, how did you view the term redneck, and did you see it positively? Like, what was your experience with that word? And we'll get into a little bit later of like why it's important, why it's relevant.
I mean, I thought in general, being called a redneck was one of the worst things that you could call me, I think, in that sense of time. It made me feel less than. I guess I should say. It was very derogatory. That's the way I took it. It made me feel little. It made me feel as if I maybe wasn't as smart as somebody, or it was just something that kind of was a downer. I hated being called a redneck.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I think people that were from outside of like West Virginia, Appalachia would call us rednecks, and it was always meant in a derogatory way. It was never meant in a good way. And I don't know what all has framed that. I'm sure just like pop culture in general has framed it in a term that's negative. It's backwoods, hillbilly, like uneducated type. And but when we would look at it in school, like we would always kind of view it negatively too, because one, we didn't know the history behind it, and two, it was always perceived negatively. So how else are you gonna look at it? And we would always see it as those like bubbies sitting in the parking lot at Parkersburg South with a big ass fat fucking lip packed with like a entire log of Kodiak long chew that would just sit there and with a deer head in his lap, like that kind of person. And that we always just had such a negative opinion of it and an opinion of the term because it was always presented to us in a negative way.
No, I think you're exactly right. I can remember actually, and you didn't go to the same junior high as me, but we had this teacher. She was a doctor. she was a doctor, so she wanted to make sure that you knew she was a doctor. I had AP English in that class. Kid walks in, guy who is kind of, I always called him like redneck smart. He is very like. He loves, being outdoors. He has his Chevy emblem on everywhere he walks, and he wore a shirt that said redneck, and it had the Chevy emblem on it, as I mentioned before. He comes in, he sits down, and Dr. Dale just kind of looks at him for a second, looks away, looks back, says, "Do you know that you have a 4.0? And he said, "Yeah." She said, "So why would you wear a shirt that says idiot?"
Oh, shit.
And I can still picture that to this. The whole thing just plays out in my head. And I think that was, she wasn't from West Virginia. I believe that she was from New England, but she took it as, that was the feeling that I had too, was like, why are you wearing the shirt? And as I got older, I kind of thought, well, what gives her the fucking right to say that? Well, why does she get to define the term? And that was my biggest issue, I guess, now. But back then, I was probably agreeing with
Yeah, well, how could you not, though? Because that's the environment that you're brought up in, and that's the only definition that you or I knew, was that, like, dumb, uneducated, like, hick, backwoods person that I think is the concept of pretty much every single stereotype for Appalachians in one way or the other. And that's just always what we've been presented with. And so when I learned of something different, it kind of blew my mind. But I think one of the reasons, though, just real quick to backtrack of why that is, pop culture has really reinforced that. And I'm not trying to throw shade against Jeff Foxworthy. His shit's really fucking funny, but he didn't do any favors for the term.
Literally got famous saying you might be a redneck.
And, he's speaking some truth to those examples by for sure. But it's just come to symbolize a sort of uneducated white trash that I think a lot of people unfairly stereotype Appalachians as. But there is another side of the story, John, and I think you're kind of familiar with it, but I want to run through sort of just a very brief history of the term, as West Virginians and Appalachians should know it or do know it, and how it kind of came to be in its own little origin story, if you will indulge me a little bit. All right, it's important to first premise this by saying that the actual origin of the term is disputed. So this is what's commonly accepted in West Virginia, but I think there's been some acknowledgement that the term itself existed before this time period in 1920, which we'll be talking about. But basically, the term itself is symbolic of the solidarity and defiance demonstrated by the thousands of coal miners and their families who fought in what became known as the West Virginia Mine Wars, which they took place about 1921. It was 10 to 20,000 coal miners who were looking for the right to unionize and they clashed with the company enforcers and then with the National Guard. And this became known as the Battle of Blair Mountain, which if you go throughout West Virginia, you'll see many references to. To give you just a little bit of context at the time, coal mining almost in a way, and I'm kind of hesitant to use this term, but it was almost like indentured servitude in a way. Working in a coal mine was extremely dangerous. You lived in company towns where the coal companies literally owned everything. They owned the stores, they owned the schools, the churches, everything. And so they compelled their workers to work there without organizing and without unionizing, and basically ruled with an iron fist. And so these families didn't have any rights or anything really, and they got pissed off, and they decided to revolt. And so, John, an interesting nugget here, two of them actually, that you will remember is one, that when they marched, they wore red bandanas around their necks, hence the term redneck. There you go. And we'll get into the misnomer of that here in a second. But one thing I did just want to point out real quick before moving on is that these weren't just a bunch of white guys, John. I know that a lot of people try to paint Appalachia as a bunch of white people and white dudes in the coal mines, but it wasn't just that. They were diverse. Some were native-born whites from the nearby area. Some were African-Americans who'd come up from the Deep South. Some were immigrants from Hungary and Italy that spoke little English. But despite all of this, they came together, formed a coalition, and pushed back against these oppressive coal companies. And that is such an important lesson that is rarely taught. Were you taught it in West Virginia history at all?
No, not at all.
Not at all. I learned all 55 counties and their county seats, but I didn't learn a damn thing about the Battle of Blair Mountain. Well, to put a little button on this short story, and there's plenty more detail that you can get into about it, and if you want to read any books about it, we're happy to refer you to many really good ones. But the point being is that the term redneck in Appalachian speak symbolizes a diverse group of people who fought against unfair, unjust, and oppressive regimes for a better life. And that's a damn good definition that I am proud of.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things that, I don't know, we were just talking off of the podcast, and that kind of that snippet that you gave in terms of the miners being diverse, if you were to ask a lot of people, those even maybe from West Virginia or from Appalachia, they wouldn't think that. I think that they would have a certain image in mind because that's kind of what we've been told was the case back then. And it's kind of odd to think about West Virginia, a section of West Virginia, being considered diverse, especially in coal situation. So it's cool to see that. It's definitely different than what maybe it's portrayed as. And I think it's nice to actually hear that this term came from something that was kind of worked for. I mean, they earned this term. And unfortunately, it got turned into, derogatory thing, but they earned the term redneck.
Well, and I think one of the bigger points is, like I mentioned earlier, we didn't learn about this in school. We didn't learn, at least I didn't. I don't want to speak for everybody in West Virginia and Appalachia, but I certainly didn't. You didn't. And we didn't learn about the rich diversity of West Virginia and Appalachia in school either. And that's part of this whole problem. I mean, I don't want to jump down a rabbit hole here, but that's part of the problem is that we need to be teaching other Appalachians about Appalachia. And, I mean, I think that's what we're trying to do a little bit here. We're not trying to put ourselves off as teachers, but to correct the record on some of this stuff, because before looking this stuff up, I would not have known any of that. I used to think growing up, the term redneck, like if you actually got a technical definition of it, I used to think it was because people that worked out in the fields got sunburn on their necks.
Yeah.
That's what I knew as a redneck, technically.
Yeah, I mean that's fair. That I think there's a lot of people who couldn't tell you where it came from.
Well, and like I said, that's one attribution to it.
Right.
And I think it's one that we should reclaim as the definition of it, because, and this kind of gets into why it is we're actually talking about it today. We're talking about it because never has it really been more relevant than now. I mean, you look at what we talked about, what the definition of it was, what those people did, what those coal miners and their families did. They got pissed off because it wasn't the government, but essentially it was the people that was ruling over them. So in some ways it was a metaphor for government, the coal companies that were, oppressing them for several years. They finally had enough. They said, the hell with this. They fought them, and it was a big deal at the time. And so now, if you look at the context of today, I mean, look at what's happening in Portland, where the federal government is sending in federal unmarked troops, like in plain clothes sometimes, or in just unidentifiable army fatigues, taking peaceful protesters off the streets. If you think about like the context of that compared to the Battle of Blair Mountain, there's a lot of similarities there. You have an oppressive regime that is preventing people from living their normal life or exercising their God-given rights under the United States Constitution.
I think that's a good comparison. I didn't even think about that. This is a time period. I think that this is the point in time where you can, as a group of people, can kind of create the correct image. There's a lot of things going on right now that of people kind of fighting for what's right and for the way that they really should be portrayed. And I think Appalachia could join that as well. Anybody that lives in a rural area, they just, unfortunately right now, there are areas, and I'll admit West Virginia being one of them, that are playing to those stereotypes currently, and that's an unfortunate situation. But there are other areas in Appalachia that aren't, and I think this is, I guess, the time where you could make a movement to really show people what Appalachians really stand for.
Absolutely. I think you always hear about like rising up against the government. That's always this common trope. And a lot of times it's used in the context of something silly, like when there's like simple common sense gun reforms being proposed, and everybody with an NRA card in their back pocket says, "I'm going to rise up against the government." But this is a time when there's legitimately the federal government oppressing peaceful people exercising their rights and nothing else. And so. And this could happen anywhere. It's not just Portland. It's not relegated to just Portland. It could be happening in West Virginia. It could be happening in Kentucky, in Virginia, in Pittsburgh, in, Cumberland, Maryland, of all places.
Some of this stuff happened in Columbus.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so, goddamn it, it's time for us to take back the term redneck, and by living how we show it, by example. Take a page out of the miners in the Battle of Blair Mountain. Don't put up with this bullshit. And, I'm not advocating for violence, because there's a lot of violence in that. I'm not saying that that's, I don't want to come off like that at all. But fighting an oppressive regime is something that I never thought that we would have to even really talk about on this show in these types of circumstances. But after the past couple weeks, really the past couple months, it's become very clear that there's some really fucked up shit going on in this country, and it's happening right before our eyes, and the government doesn't seem to care.
The government doesn't care, and unfortunately a lot of people don't either. They see that it's a problem, but tend to back off. I think that this is the time where, I'm kind of repeating myself, but this is the time that really Appalachia could stand up and take its name back. Right now, it's not really happening. I mean, you're seeing still a lot of these things go across the country, and Appalachia kind of is silent right now. There are parts of it that aren't, some of the major cities, and obviously, where Breonna Taylor was killed in Kentucky, that was obviously, there's an uprising there, but I don't think there's enough, and this is kind of my issue with Appalachia always. We tend to be the most quiet region, when in fact we have some of the loudest people. And I just don't understand why we continue to not stand up. I don't know if it's because of the history of the region and kind of always being, quote, put in our place, but we're almost kind of timid, and I don't think we should be. I think we should be the leaders of these movements, because we have the history that we've done this. It's kind of like act like you've been there before. Appalachia has been there before. And right now I think we need to get back to it.
Yeah, I would say I don't want to downplay what's been happening though in Appalachia. There's been a lot of people that have put themselves out there, especially in more hostile parts of the country, and have shown a lot of bravery in this. And I think, but to your point, I think we definitely want to encourage it more. We want more of these redneck revolts. Be proud to wave the term redneck in other people's faces and take it back and show the meaning behind it, like from the Battle of Blair Mountain, where people stood up and they said, this is bullshit, this is enough. Because that's what it means to be a redneck. It's not some dip-chewing bubby in the back of his truck. It is people who are some of the hardest working people in this country who are tired of the bullshit. And there's, a lot of Appalachians that we know that are tired of the bullshit. And I think, I don't know. I know that I sound like a broken record a little bit, but I think it's time to take back a term like this and to weaponize it in a way that's positive and that shows that Appalachians are just as much a part of these fights as any other place.
I think that's the first time I've ever heard weaponized and positive in the same sentence.
I'm going to make it. You know what? Fuck that. I'm going to blaze some trails with that.
I'm bringing this out. Chuck, I think I won't say we've done a great job. That's not our thing. We don't pat ourselves on the back. But I think that we've been able to tell maybe a different story than other people have realized or even heard. And I think that this could be the beginning of a beautiful thing. Maybe we'll do more episodes like this, where we talk about different types of terms that maybe Appalachians should take back. Maybe some they shouldn't. You never...
Well, I think that's definitely the goal. I think this should be viewed as part one of an Appalachian heritage, series. Kind of like what we've done with stereotypes and with others, is where we want to really talk about the heritage of Appalachia and be able to reframe it in a term in ways that it applies today. Yeah,
and I would love to actually, if we can, I'd love to open it up to the people listening, because I want to know, there's some parts of Appalachian heritage, Chuck, that you and I don't know. I mean, I always think, and this is why Appalachia is so kind of unique, we're a region, but we also have these specialized regions throughout, and I think all of them have different heritages, and they're all different in so many ways. And the only way we're going to find that out is through the people listening, because, luckily we have a very, diverse group of listeners, so we want to hear from them.
Hit us up. Hit those DMs. Hit them hard. Well, with that, I think what we'll do is we'll transition into, the typical segment, but with a broader discussion. So it's been a week since last we talked, John, and there has been a lot that's happened in Appalachia. A lot of just really some real grifting going on, I think, is probably the best word to use for it. Some grifting and some downright corrupt-ass shit. And so... without further ado, we're going to break this apart and beef with Big John.
Beef with Big John!
Chuck, I gotta be honest with you. There were a lot of things that I could have picked for this week's beef, but there's just one that just stands out. And unfortunately, our friends in Ohio, I am headed back to have beef.
It hurts
there. Man. And I know. I said that I would spread this out, but come on, you can't blame me for talking about this. And if you're from Ohio or you watch the news, you know what I'm about to say. Larry Householder.
Who?
Exactly. I had no idea who this guy was because I don't live in Ohio, and that tends to be what local government is. But I know who Larry Householder is now, and it's not for a good reason.
Hey, would you say he's going to be a householder name?
Oh, that is good. All right, so Larry Householder is, I guess, currently still the Speaker of the House in Ohio. He was very, very powerful. Actually, probably one of the most powerful Speaker of the Houses in the country. I've never seen this much power in one person who's not a sitting governor or even in the Senate. I mean, this guy is super powerful. What does this guy do? He ends up getting arrested, Chuck. But in order to understand it, you have to look back a little bit. Householder.
I mean, what was it for? What was it for? Was it for drunk driving? It seems to happen a lot with politicians.
Well, that's true, and it could definitely be, but it's not.
Oh, okay. Was it because he stole some money from a lemonade stand?
Well, if he touches Elliot's lemonade stand, that's one. That is far beyond what he did. But what he did do was, so he was one of the driving forces behind this plan to help rescue these nuclear power plants. It was $150 million a year through 2026 to help 2 different plants, one in Cleveland and one in Toledo. So this is a huge bailout. It's going to be a ton of taxpayer money, and it's going to help these 2 plants and these 2, these companies. What do? Well, Chuck, they bribe him, and he accepts $60 million.
Jesus.
So, obviously, this is a huge deal. But let's think about the back door of this, Chuck. You're Larry Householder. I'm, obviously representing the power plants. How does this conversation even come about?
I don't know. I don't know how you get from point A to point $60 million goddamn dollars, and how ignorant and how much of a fucking prick do you have to be to think you can get away with that?
The crazy thing about this, Chuck, is I think people kind of thought this was fishy because there have been several attempts to have these bailouts. And then all of a sudden it became kind of this really hot topic. They always stalled. I mean, very easily. And this was before Householder became Speaker. But months after taking over, he personally rolled out a new plan to subsidize these power plants. Months, not years, months later, takes over, goes ahead and gets bribed for $60 million.
What a legend.
So, I think the craziest thing about this is that this plan was in action for a while, too. So he became the Speaker, I think, in January, but he had been paid $60 million over the last 3 years. So this wasn't just like you met with the Speaker one time and you developed this plan. No, this was thought out. So my thing is, there are other, people involved, but I want to know if there are other legislators involved.
I would think that I don't know. I mean, that's a hell of a scheme to pull off as one person. However, you do have to question $60 million over the past year. Like, I would have to think that somebody might have caught his attention when he stopped driving his F-150 to work and started whipping into the Ohio State Capitol in a Bugatti or something.
Well, funny you mention that. Householder, actually, so First Energy, which you and I know, it's First Energy is actually a lot in West Virginia, Ohio, and I think parts of Kentucky. But they're the ones who owned the power plants. And they say unknown company gave Householder $60 million. I'm gonna bet it was them.
And it rhymes with burst synergy.
Yeah, exactly. They donated a ton of money to Householder's campaign because they knew he was going to be Speaker. So they wanted him to be in power so they could get this across. You talked about arriving in style. Householder flew to President Trump's inauguration on the First Energy Company's plane.
Yeah, all right. Don't even hide it, man. Don't even hide your corruption. Just put it out there for the world to see. Brass balls. All right.
He then starts getting quarterly payments of $250,000. Again, the complaint says from unidentified company. And this was sent through like a kind of makeshift corporation called, I think, Generation Now.
Was he like getting paid in Bitcoin? Did he have to declare this on his taxes?
No idea. I have no idea how this even got through to the point where it did, but I mean, this guy is screwed. To go from Speaker of the House to this, I guess, hated of a person. I mean, That's an accomplishment.
I would say that's putting it kindly. I would say corrupt motherfucking bastard is what he was or is. And I was just looking this up real quick. I don't know what the context of it was, but did you know that he served a previous stint as speaker from 2001 to 2004, leaving amid another FBI investigation?
Oh my God, I did not know that.
It apparently never produced any charges, but my God, you know what? It's kind of like, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, I get arrested for a $60 million bribe, I guess. I mean, the brazen corruption of this is just astounding.
So I guess I should tell you some of the other people involved. One of them was a huge, supporter of the Ohio Republican Party, but he had kind of been on the outs of that because he was censured by the party because he launched a PAC in June to turn out GOP voters for Joe Biden. Pretty weird.
Wait, who was it?
His last name's Borges. Trying to think.
Oh, okay, whatever. That's funny.
So the other kind of high profile guy that's involved in this is one of Ohio's biggest connected lobbyists, and guess what he represents? High-powered clients like pharmaceuticals, gambling, alcoholic.
Oh, they don't make any money. What are you talking about? Pharma companies, they ain't got no money.
And they also have arrested the former investment officer of the Ohio Treasury Office.
Damn.
This was a huge team effort, from lobbyist to the sitting House Speaker to a guy who was on the inside as an investment officer. This is House of Cards, Ohio. You know how, like, they have all the storage unit shows and they break off? They're like, storage unit Parkersburg and storage unit Los Angeles or whatever. This is going to be...
That's a hell of a jump from Parkersburg to Los Angeles. I think one of those is...
Yeah. Sorry, they never made a Los Angeles version.
No.
But this will... I hope this becomes a show. I will watch the shit out of it because this is so interesting on the dynamics of this. I mean, this could rival Tiger King. That's all I'm saying.
Maybe we got to check to see if Larry Householder has any ties to Joe Exotic, I think.
Yeah, I think so. The last thing I'll leave you with is Ohio, you need to pick better people because Householder isn't the only Ohio speaker to come under investigation in 2 years. Former Republican Speaker Rosenberger was also investigated by the FBI because he had a lavish lifestyle and a condo he rented directly from a wealthy GOP donor, and he continued to say he had broken no laws. He luckily was not charged, but the investigation is still open on him. Ohio, what are you doing? Come on.
What the fuck, man? Come on, Ohio. Come on. Let me ask you this real quick. Did this investigation, like, get a cool name or anything?
You know, I actually looked for that because I think that could have been the title of my new Netflix show, but I didn't find anything cool.
That's disappointing because this reminded me of a couple of cases in Tennessee. One was Operation Rocky Top, and the other was Operation Tennessee Waltz, and they were both these big bribery takedowns.
Let me see. Nope, there has been no... Okay, so we need to really get on this, Chuck. We have to do some research to find out what the operation was called. I'm hoping that it was like... I'm going to assume it was like something like Operation Dark Money or something, but I mean that's just my thought. Okay, let's get a prediction. What do you think the operation was called if we can ever figure it out?
Yep, okay, Operation Know When to Holder Them.
Oh, that's a good one. That is a good one. There's no way they came up with that.
No, because I pulled it right out of my ass just now. Improv, baby. Woo!
No, I'm just saying, I don't think that maybe they had too much time.
Well, no, I mean, because if you look at, like, the names of, like, FBI operate, like, Rocky Top, Tennessee Waltz, those are pretty, not exactly a hard jump to get to those in Tennessee.
Right, I mean, the coolest one I ever heard was Operation Overlord.
What was that for?
Operation Overlord was Normandy.
Oh, well, that's okay. Fair enough.
Yeah, so pretty cool.
There was one called Operation Doughboy.
Oh shit! Was that my 7th grade basketball?
Nice. No, it was a case of a middle-aged businessman selling cocaine.
Damn, that's pretty good.
There was one in Rhode Island called Operation Plunder Dome.
Do you think I could get a job just making operation names?
I would hope so.
That would be pretty sick. I would do that. Imagine having that freedom, but you would have a lot of eyes on you.
Yeah. Well, I bet you can't guess what this case was about. It's called Operation Rap Crack.
Rappers selling crack.
Damn it. Nailed it.
Yeah.
Fuck. Well, I hope that Operation Know When to Hold Her them. I think that we should cobble together our Patreon funds and try to purchase the Netflix rights to those, and then we can make a killing. I hear that Larry Householder has a little bit of liquid funds that he's looking to offload. So,
well, I mean, if his bail is set at like $100, I mean, we may be able to help
by bailing him out. I don't know that would help.
I only need him for 2 hours. I need the story, Chuck.
All right, fair enough. Whew, well, what a meaty beef that was. Let's close it out on that. It was beautiful. Larry Householder, go f*** yourself.
Such a...
Everyone else in Ohio, try to do better. And by that I mean don't get involved in a $60 million bribery scheme. Not that hard.
Maybe stay away from First Energy if they're offering you money.
Maybe stay away from First Energy. Start Second Energy or something. Come on, guys.
Or unidentified company. If either of those come at you, don't take the money.
I would absolutely go with unidentified company to provide my energy at my house. Yep, okay. Subscribe to us. Go to our website, Appodlachia.com. You can find everything there. And we'll talk to you again next week when there's more stuff, when there's more Appalachia, and when there's more of us.